Breaking tonight, just 24 hours into President-elect Donald Trump's rollout of his White House staff, and he's already driving critics wild with a powerful new position for a close and controversial advisor. Good evening and welcome to the Kelly File, everyone. I'm Megyn Kelly. The fallout continues tonight after Mr. Trump announced that two of the men who helped guide his historic presidential campaign will be his closest confidants inside the walls of 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue. Reince Priebus, the departing Republican National Committee chairman, will become Mr. Trump's chief of staff. And Steve Bannon, the controversial former executive chairman of the conservative website Breitbart News, will become Mr. Trump's chief strategist and senior counselor in the White House. It is Mr. Bannon's selection that's causing waves tonight. In moments, we'll be joined by Trump supporter and former House Speaker Newt Gingrich, who may also be playing a big role in the new administration. And we'll also talk to Kurt Bardella, who worked with Steve Bannon at Breitbart for years. But first, we begin with Chief Washington correspondent James Rosen with the new reaction to the latest moves from the president-elect. James?
Megyn, good evening. Top Republicans tonight are urging the left and even some on the right who are dismayed by President-elect Trump's appointment of Stephen Bannon as a top White House advisor to give the man a chance. Bannon is the rough-edge Trump campaign CEO, named now as chief strategist and senior counselor at the White House. A former naval officer, Bannon brought a measure of managerial competence to the Trump campaign, but it was under his leadership that Breitbart, the conservative website, began to appeal to the so-called alt-right, with headlines excoriating Weekly Standard editor Bill Kristol as a, quote, renegade Jew, and asserting notions like birth control makes women unattractive and crazy. A spokesman for Senate Minority Leader Harry Reid said, quote, it is easy to see why the KKK views Trump as their champion when Trump appoints one of the foremost peddlers of white supremacist themes and rhetoric as his top aide.
Breitbart does give me a real pause about sometimes they're going well beyond accepted norms and frankly expressing viewpoints that are just not consistent with my values and I think many Americans as well.
It was also unusual that Bannon's rank will be co-equal to that of Reince Priebus, the Republican National Committee chairman, tapped now to serve as chief of staff. Traditionally, the chief of staff has enjoyed primacy in running the White House. Today, Priebus defended the appointment of his co-equal.
The Steve Bannon I know is a guy that is really on the same page with a lot of the almost everything that I agree with as far as advising President-elect Trump. So I haven't seen any of these things that people are crying out about. But look, it's a good team. It works, and I think if people saw the last few months in the campaign, it worked very well.
Trump advisor Kellyanne Conway told reporters at Trump Tower today that Priebus and Bannon complement each other, adding they both have the most important thing, the ear of the boss. Megyn?
James, great to see you. Joining us on this and the rest of the White House transition, Newt Gingrich, former Republican Speaker of the House and co-author of the new book, Rediscovering God in America. He's got another one. I just saw treason in an airport today. I can't keep up with him, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you.
Also with us is Kurt Bardella. He is the president and CEO of Endeavor Strategies, and he worked for Bannon as a media consultant at Breitbart News. Let's start with you, Kurt, on Mr. Bannon. I mean, I've read a lot of things about him. His detractors say he pushes a racist, a misogynist agenda. But what is the actual evidence of that?
Well, I think if you look at the litany of headlines that have run across Breitbart News for the last 2 years, headlines about women shouldn't be reporting in tech, women and the birth control issue at Planned Parenthood, you see an agenda form.
But you know, his defenders would say that he's not responsible for every headline that goes on Breitbart, and he didn't write those pieces.
Well, I think that when you're at the top of the organizational chart in an organization, what happens below you, and when it happens frequently, you either have two choices. You can either address it and say, this isn't who we are, this isn't who we believe, and we shouldn't be doing these things, or you don't do anything and you're willfully saying that that's okay.
Well, you worked with him for how many years?
For almost 2 years.
Okay, and so what was your experience?
My experience there was there were no issues at all when headlines like that were run, when media inquiries came in asking, what did you think of these things? Do you guys stand by that? There was never at any time, any type of retraction, walking back, concession that maybe they went a little too far with some of this stuff. They were very happy when they got that kind of attention.
Do you believe he believes in those principles, if you will, or do you believe he is just a provocateur looking to generate clicks and attention?
I think it's probably a little bit of both. I mean, when you look at his plan put into action during the Trump campaign, it's not like they ran away from those themes. They embraced them. They played off of them. And it's been a recipe for success for them so far, as evidenced by the fact that Trump's in the White House right now, and Steve is now in this very high-profile co-chief of staff role. But at the end of the day, actions speak louder than anything, and their actions kind of speak for themselves.
But, you know, Steve Bannon, obviously Trump controls himself. I mean, I think we've seen that Trump really answers to no man or woman. He controls his own approach. But Steve Bannon did sort of call the possibility of a Donald Trump as early as 2010. Listen to this in 2010 when he was talking about what the future holds. He says it's going to be an insurgent, center-right populist movement that is that's a tough word, virulently anti-establishment, and is going to continue to hammer this city, Washington, both the progressive left and the institutional Republican Party. I mean, that was 2010.
Yeah, right after the Tea Party
So you can
revolution.
see why Trump was attracted to him.
Oh, they're made for each other here, because you have two people who are provocateurs, who do like being contrarians, who enjoy pressing buttons, and who have an issue with the status quo in Washington. And in Trump, Steve found the first political figure to really symbolize that he can marshal his platform around. And in Steve, Trump found an audience that existed for that message. They were a perfect match.
Do you think that Steve Bannon, that those kinds of comments and so on, the headlines at Breitbart, would be pushed as an agenda? You know, an anti-woman, anti-minority, anti-gay agenda? Because Trump certainly, I mean, well, you tell me.
Yeah, I think it's an agenda. I mean, I think anytime that you're doing something as frequently as they have been, with the audience and the size that they have, and the profile that they've built off of that, I don't know how you can say anything else other than that's clearly an agenda that they're being
How
pushed.
does that make you feel if you feel that way and you work with the man closely for a couple of years?
Well, that's part of the reason why I left, and I said this publicly back in March, that I personally could not be a part of something like this anymore. And I believe that when you can't do your job honestly and to the best of your ability, that's when it's time to walk away, and that's why I did.
Are you at all worried now, being on the opposite side of Bannon, given his ascension?
No. I mean, first of all, if Steve Bannon, as the co-White House chief of staff, has nothing better to do than try to go after my life or livelihood, that's concerning all to itself. But at the end of the day, I think that he has bigger fish to fry.
Kurt, great to see you.
Thanks for having me on, Megan.
Thanks for coming on. And now we turn to Newt Gingrich, former Republican Speaker of the House. Mr. Speaker, good to have you back. So,
good to be with you.
You've heard these reports about Steve Bannon, and really, and I'll just show the viewers some of the headlines. And you know, he didn't write these, but he was the executive chairman of Breitbart when some of these went up. And here's just a couple. He called, not he, Breitbart referred to Bill Kristol as a renegade Jew. It was written by a Jewish author, but still. The solution to online harassment is simple. Women should log off was another one. Here's a couple more for you. Stand by. They'll put them up there. Birth control makes women unattractive and crazy. Would you rather your child had feminism or cancer? And then there are these chestnuts. Gay rights have made us dumber. Fat shaming works. So those are the kinds of headlines that have people saying, was this the best choice? Your thoughts?
Well, first of all, there's a big difference between the kind of stuff they did at Breitbart, which was designed to attract audiences and was actually very successful. I mean, lots of people tuned in, partly out of amusement. It's like reading the Daily Mail every day from London. I mean, there's all sorts of stuff there, and
it's clickbait.
You keep finding yourself doing it. Bannon is a very serious guy. Calista and I have worked with him on several movies. We know him pretty well. He is very deeply concerned that Washington has grown corrupt, way too large as a government, a threat to our liberties, and he feels those things very deeply. He's also a former naval officer who has served this country very patriotically. He played a big role in the election of Donald Trump. I thought what Trump did was frankly very smart. He took Reince Priebus, who had done probably the best job as RNC chairman in modern history, put him in as the daily coordinator as chief of staff. But then he said, look, I want a guy who's going to think about the fights we're going to be in and who's going to be enthusiastic about those fights. And he gave, in some ways, he I think ended up giving Bannon the equivalent of the Karl Rove job or the Axelrod job in previous administrations.
And that's what Bannon has said,
powerful,
that he's a fighter.
Yeah.
And he likes to bust up, you know, Washington. He doesn't like the establishment. And that's what Trump is. And that's what a lot of Trump's voters and supporters wanted. Now, let me ask you about the news on potential cabinet appointments. Tonight, the AP is reporting that Rudy Giuliani is the favorite. They're saying the favorite for Secretary of State. Do you have any information on that?
I have no information, but if Rudy wants it, he'll get it. Rudy's probably been the closest surrogate. He and Senator Sessions have been the two closest surrogates to President-elect Trump. He has done a great job. He has worked his heart out. I thought he might prefer Attorney General, where he would be brilliant, or Homeland Security, where his experience at 9/11 would be great. I think it would be fabulous to have him as Secretary of State. He's already known worldwide. He is a great manager, and he would do a lot both to represent America, which is what we need, and to reform the State Department, which is what we need. So I'd be very enthusiastic if he picks Rudy to be Secretary of State.
Some are saying Jeff Sessions will probably go Secretary of Defense, and that Laura Ingraham may be under consideration for either press secretary or another position in the administration, which she did not shoot down when she was on Tucker Carlson's new show today at 7, by the way. Possibly General Michael Flynn for NSA. And what about you, Mr. Speaker? Are you being considered for a position, and is there one you have your eye on?
Well, I want to be the general planner, looking out over the next 8 years and trying to design how we fundamentally reshape the federal government. And that's a very broad job. The closest analogy probably is Harry Hopkins and the work he did for Franklin Delano Roosevelt. But let me say for a second about Sessions. Senator Sessions was the most loyal, the earliest supporter of Trump in Washington. He would be great as Attorney General because he spent 13 years in the Justice Department and was Attorney General of Alabama. He would also be tremendous at the Department of Defense. I would be very enthusiastic, whatever he and the President-elect decide.
Now, Trump is getting hit tonight in some corners because he is asking for top secret clearance for his children in the Trump administration. And the conflict, his detractors say, is that he has said his children, his adult children, are going to be running the Trump organization, and that it would be inappropriate or wrong to have them maintain this active business interest with international ties and both have access to top secret information. Do they have a point?
Look, I think when you look at how Hillary Clinton totally abused the system, I would sure trust Ivanka or Donald or Don Jr. or Eric a heck of a lot more than Hillary Clinton. And I think that they would keep the secrets. The objective fact is this is a president-elect who is going to rely very closely on his family, including Jared Kushner, Ivanka's husband. The four of them really form his brain trust. These are people he trusts, he loves, he feels comfortable with. I think the President of the United States ought to be able to designate the people he wants advice from. And I think that these four are going to be tremendous asset to the United States of America.
But just to press you once more on that, the critics are suggesting that not necessarily that they couldn't be trusted to not reveal the top secret information, but that it poses an interesting dilemma, a conflict for them in making business decisions about foreign countries that they actually have some top secret knowledge about.
I'll tell you what, the first time they come in with a $25 million check from the Saudis, or they come in with $1 million birthday check from Qatar, or they come in with special deals from a variety of international people, precisely like Bill Clinton for a long time,
know about that.
I'll start to worry. Well, of course you could. I'll start to worry about it. But I think
we wouldn't know about that.
You know, historically, we were a country where people like John Foster Dulles could be a great international lawyer and a very powerful Secretary of State. Historically, we thought you had to have people who were competent and knew things, and they actually could work together. It's only in the last 30 or 40 years we've gotten into this wacky idea that if you actually know something and succeed at something, you're probably not appropriately involved in government. So you end up with people in government who don't know anything and can't do anything. I think this is something we ought to explore carefully. There should clearly be rules. There might well have to be a certain amount of transparency. And then, frankly, the Trump family would have to decide, are they willing to live with that transparency? There's no question you're asking an important question about this, and I think that we have to explore it. But in principle, having the president have an ability to talk candidly with people who are very, very close to him, I think is a good thing, not a bad thing.
Mr. Speaker, thank you for being here, and congratulations. Congratulations on Donald Trump's win. Well, even before the president-elect takes office, some Democratic mayors are already staging a revolt, pledging to fight any new White House effort to enforce immigration laws. Have you heard about this? It's spreading now. Judge Andrew Napolitano is next on what is shaping up to be an explosive showdown in more than one city. Plus 6 days, and some in the media are still having a meltdown over the results of the election. We'll speak with Howard Kurtz and Molly Hemingway about where this is going next. Breaking tonight, 6 days since the election, and some in the media are still publicly struggling with how to deal with the results of last Tuesday. Just in the last 24 hours, we saw New York Times columnist Charles Blow complaining that, quote, "We are living in two diverging Americas, at odds and at battle. Trump's America won this round." E.J. Dionne Jr. of the Washington Post writing, quote, "Let's be clear, the United States of America is not Donald Trump's country." And in the same publication, Jonathan Capehart writes about, quote, "Why millions fear the looming Trump presidency," adding, "President-elect Trump has made promises that represent a threat to real lives and livelihoods. Some are unconstitutional. All are immoral." Joining me now, Howard Kurtz, host of Media Buzz, and Mollie Hemingway, senior editor at The Federalist. Great to see you both. So, Mollie, let me ask you, do you take issue with those headlines?
Oh, I mean, it's just been kind of surprising to see how poorly many in our media have handled this election. Part of it is just that they are in liberal bubbles and that the people that they're surrounded by are also struggling, so they're kind of focused on that side of the story. But a big part of it is that they can't really come to terms with Donald Trump being president until they come to terms with just how profoundly they failed to cover this election well. And this is not just about the polls. This is not about trusting in them too much. This is about really misunderstanding the nature of the race, misunderstanding how Hillary Clinton was viewed by a lot of Americans, as well as Donald Trump. And then most importantly, I think, profoundly misunderstanding who Donald Trump voters were. And you see that in these headlines you just pointed out. There's still a hostility and an inability to even try to understand what motivated his supporters.
Howie, do you agree with that?
You know, liberal commentators are entitled to their opinion, but some of them have been really ugly in refusing to accept the outcome of this election, Megyn, and they continue to attack Donald Trump. They continue to call the people who voted for Donald Trump racist and morons. We're talking here about 60 million American voters, and some of them are beating up on the press because it was our job somehow to stop Donald Trump, which of course is not our job. But I'm even more troubled by the elements of the mainstream media that are still hostile to varying degrees toward the guy who has won the election 6 days ago.
Now, but how do you square this with the genuine controversies that Trump himself created, right? Because the media you can't have the Access Hollywood bus thing break and then have 12 women come forward saying that he assaulted them and ignore it, right? And so how do you square, Mollie, things like all the controversies Trump himself created, you know, like, hey, there's my African American, and the Mexico's not sending its best people, and all that stuff that he did generate controversy with media bias?
Well, all of those things are real, and everybody is very familiar with all of Donald Trump's weaknesses. This is where I think it gets back to the fundamentals of the race and what actually motivated voters. I mean, one of the things that was interesting about the Hillary Clinton campaign is that they wanted to focus on Donald Trump's personality, and that did make for very good copy and very good TV, and there's a reason why we focus on it, because it's very dramatic. At the same time, there were serious policy issues in play, support for his plans on immigration, foreign policy, economic policy, as well as something that I think even, you know, many people who did kind of pick up on these things didn't realize, which is a very big frustration with political correctness itself. And people are just kind of sick of that kind of focus, and they're punching back.
That's true. The political correctness thing is real, Howie, and we've been covering it for years now. And I do think that there's a segment, you tell me, of media that doesn't get that and just thinks that there's something wrong with you if you don't want to clean up our language, our politicians' language, and our language as a society.
I think it's worse than that. I think for some in the media, there's something wrong with you if you somehow supported Donald Trump and not seeing that the country has moved to a different place. Now, it's fine for journalists to continue to report aggressively on President-elect Trump, but let me just read you one sentence from a New York Times news story. This is when President-elect Trump visited President Obama at the White House. Mr. Trump, whose campaign drew support from white supremacist groups, sat in front of a bust of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. It's that kind of thing that sends the signal that we're not over it, we're not going to get over it. Now, the Times editor and publisher did put out sort of a modified mea culpa. Maybe we underestimated Trump. But this kind of thing just signals that it's almost like announcing we're going to be in the loyal opposition for the next 4 years instead of giving a guy a fair shot at showing he can be president.
And I mean, to diminish his, 60 million voters as summed up by the white supremacists who did support him, doesn't quite get it. Mollie, let me ask you, because some of the media, like we saw New York Magazine with this cover before the election, right? So you wonder why some in the general population think that some in the media are not being fair. They have an agenda. They have their thumb on their scale when it comes to now President-elect Trump.
Well, and I mean, clearly they did, and people were very overt about that, and there's actually a benefit to that. We had a lot of people come out and just admit that they thought that their job was to keep Donald Trump from becoming president and to help Hillary Clinton get into office. It's good to know where people stand. Unfortunately, there's been, therefore, a complete destruction of that trust relationship between viewers, readers, listeners, and the media. And so the media need to do a very good job of, first of all, coming to terms with just how serious the failure was. And they really need to start doing that quickly because it hasn't happened yet. Then they also need to just start reporting the news and not telling people what to think about it. Their spin is not nearly as crafty as they think it is, and people are seeing through it.
And then more than anything, they may be out of touch with, flyover country, real Americans.
Well,
not that you're not a real American on the coast, but just Americans who live in the heartland who just have different values and see the world differently than the people media surround themselves with.
All Americans are real Americans, but you're not seeing a lot of diversity in American newsrooms. And so I think that people who run newspapers and magazines and radio programs and television programs, they really need to make sure that they're getting an intellectual diversity in those newsrooms. True.
However, Howie, that is not, I mean, let's be honest here. Many of the Trump supporters were, I mean, incendiary in their hate for certain reporting, and I'm not referring to anybody in particular, but for certain reporting that was critical of Donald Trump or skeptical of Donald Trump, that was right on the money. Controversies that he generated.
There's no question that all of us in the news business, when we did do legitimate questioning of incendiary statements Trump had made or things about his record, got a lot of ugliness and abuse online, and I'm not excusing that. But look at the coverage, the muted coverage of these protests. Imagine if Hillary Clinton had won and Trump supporters were out there demonstrating in cities saying, "Not my president," and in some cases engaging in violence.
They'd be saying that they're all sexist. They'd be saying they're all sexist.
Exactly.
If it had been President Obama, they'd be saying that they're racist. I know. I mean, we've seen that double standard. Great to see you both.
Same here, Megan.
So 2 weeks ago, President Obama was telling the world that Donald Trump was unfit for office. Just ahead, we'll show you what happened when reporters today asked Mr. Obama if he stands by that statement. Plus, some Democratic mayors are now threatening to go to war with the Trump White House over any new federal effort to crack down on sanctuary cities. Judge Andrew Napolitano is here on the legal fight, and then David Wohl and Julie Roginski join us on the political fallout next. A defiant message to President-elect Donald Trump from a former White House chief of staff. Chicago Mayor Rahm Emanuel suggesting in a news conference today that Chicago will remain a so-called sanctuary city. Police are not obligated to cooperate with immigration officials, or so say their local leaders. Trace Gallagher is live in our West Coast newsroom with the report. Trace?
Megan, today marks the third time since Donald Trump was elected president that Mayor Rahm Emanuel has publicly pushed back against Trump's immigration policies. Watch.
To all those who are, after Tuesday's election, very nervous, is filled with anxiety, has been spoken to. You are safe in Chicago. You are secure in Chicago. You are supported in Chicago.
The mayor did not promise to protect illegal immigrants with criminal records, which for now is exactly who Donald Trump is targeting, so he said last night on 60 Minutes. But the very definition of a sanctuary city means that local law enforcement don't cooperate with federal immigration authorities, and thousands of criminal illegal immigrants are released on U.S. streets every year, like the 2015 case of Francisco Lopez Sanchez, who was convicted 7 times, deported 5 times, and despite federal agents asking San Francisco authorities to hold him, Lopez Sanchez was released, got hold of a gun, and killed Kate Steinle. President-elect Trump has promised to battle sanctuary cities by cutting off federal funds, costing places like Chicago billions of dollars. It remains unclear if blocking funds would need congressional approval or could be done with executive order. What is clear is that a Trump administration with new chief strategist Steve Bannon and chief of staff Reince Priebus appear likely to favor a very tough anti-immigration stance. Along with Chicago Mayor Emanuel, New York Mayor Bill de Blasio, and Los Angeles Mayor Eric Garcetti are also vowing to maintain their sanctuary status. Megan.
Trace, thanks. Joining me now, Fox News senior judicial analyst, Judge Andrew Napolitano. Good to see you, Judge.
Good to see you.
So can they do this legally? Can the mayors say to President Trump once he takes office?
Okay, so here's what the mayors are not doing. They are not hiding people from the feds. They are just refusing to provide data and information to the feds. And the Supreme Court has ruled the federal government cannot commandeer local police and make them work for them. So even though this will be frustrating to a President Trump, and he probably will have to find some way to sanction them financially.
That's what he's
Congress.
saying. He's promising to cancel all federal funding to them.
He can't do that unilaterally, but I'm sure with Republicans controlling both houses of the Congress, he could put into expenditures or block grants to cities. You must do the following things in order to qualify for the block grants. But it's a basic principle of constitutional law that the federal government cannot force the states or the towns and cities to work for it. So Mayor Emanuel, Mayor de Blasio, Mayor Garcetti are within their legal rights to do what they're doing.
But what's happened, sanctuary cities get carried out in a number of different ways. Like, for example, in Chicago, they originally just stopped all city agencies from inquiring about immigration status when they provide services. So it's like, don't ask, don't tell. We don't want to know.
Well, that...
And in other cities, they just refuse to cooperate when ICE issues a detainer on an individual. It's like, didn't happen, didn't see it.
That stuff can have unintended consequences that the locals are not going to want. The type of people that Donald Trump is talking about are not your average ma and pa. He's talking about someone who has been convicted.
Like Francisco Hernandez.
Correct. Convicted of a crime, gets out of jail and is now free, but is illegally present. Allowing that person to stay in Chicago is going to harm the citizens of Chicago.
So what are the federal government's rights? I mean, if Donald Trump tries to take away funding and he gets something passed that says your federal funding is done until you comply with the law, until you actually do inquire about immigration status or enforce the ICE detainers, I mean, it's a real show of will between the federal government and the states.
Well, look at how hard up the cities are for cash. The federal government's going to be dangling billions in front of them. They're probably going to cave on this because they're going to want the cash. And if they don't cave and don't get the cash, there'll be tremendous local political pressure on them to do so. But they are legally and constitutionally within their right to say to the federal government, we're not going to work for you.
Great to see you, Judge.
Thank you.
Joining me more on the politics, David Wohl, Trump supporter and attorney, and Julie Roginski, Democratic analyst and Fox News contributor. Great to see you both.
Good to see you.
So politically, you tell me whether this is a test. This could be one of the first big tests for President Trump if these mayors in these various cities, New York, L.A., Seattle, Philadelphia, San Francisco, and Chicago, just defy him, David.
Yeah, I have no doubt about it, Megan. And I mean, this is more than just the mayor and the police chief in Los Angeles, for example, choosing federal law over state law or vice versa. They're creating policies that are in complete contravention of any law. And what they're doing is they're doing it for political purposes. Obviously, they want votes from the people they feel that they're protecting. And I got to say, you know, it's not going to work because Trump's going to come after him. He wants these people out of the country, 2 to 3 million violent criminals. He wants them gone. He can cut off funding, but he can also prosecute for obstruction of justice, for aiding and abetting a felon, for accessory to after the fact. So many felony charges that can be brought by the new attorney general.
Not for just not inquiring about immigration status. You can't prosecute
Megan, it's more than
that.
It's more than that. They don't, for example, when they're released from jail, they have an immigration hold that they ignore. Like you said, it's actively obstructing the feds from carrying out their responsibilities that leads to much more than, like the judge said, just negligent.
Yeah, because the ICE immigration enforcement can't run in there and detain everybody. They issue the detainer, and then they're relying on the local authorities to, if a guy gets arrested, detain him, which in some of these sanctuary cities, Julie, they don't. So you tell me how you see it.
Well, let's talk about the fact that sanctuary cities don't just include violent criminals, which we all agree should be locked up, and I have no problem with deporting those that are truly violent, not people who get tickets because they got pulled over, but people who commit violent crimes. But, you know, there are unintended consequences. Let's say you're a 15-year-old girl whose parents are here illegally. You're a girl who gets assaulted. You're afraid to call the police and report it because if the police come to your house, you're afraid your parents are going to potentially be arrested, detained, and deported. So when you're talking about sanctuary cities, let's not talk about just these violent criminals, which we all agree should be prosecuted and should be detained and deported. But you're talking about people who are here who are not committing any crimes.
But the flip side of that, Julie, the flip side of that is that the tolerance for people, this is the argument on the other side, who are in the country illegally, leads to situations like Francisco Hernandez, who murdered Kate Steinle. And so the people who want this policy say it's not worth it. They have empathy for the 15-year-old girl, but they have empathy for Kate Steinle and her family, too.
Well, I have tremendous empathy for Kate Steinle. Kate Steinle's killer should never have been released from prison by the sheriff. And
in a sanctuary city.
No question, but he might have been. He was, but let me just finish this. He was, and he should not have been. He was obviously necessarily a criminal. But I'm talking about that 15-year-old girl, and there are many more of those people, and there are violent criminals who will be scared to cooperate with local law enforcement, which will lead to more crime.
And other
because
crime could
communities
go
will,
up.
of course, are not going to commit to others.
Sanctuary cities precisely allow people like the man who murdered Kate Steinle to stay there without fear of being deported, and that's the problem. Mr. Trump is going to, a case-by-case basis, will not involve deporting the young girl who you're describing. It will involve deporting the 15, whether the 2 to 3 million violent criminals that need to be deported. And Barack Obama, by the way, has
been
ignored
doing that
completely.
No, excuse me. Barack Obama, in fairness, has deported more people than anybody else underneath him.
Then? Yeah, it's catch and release. Barack Obama's deportations are largely catch and release at the border.
But
we got to leave it at that.
Exactly,
Great to see you
Megan.
both.
All right, thanks.
Thank you.
Anti-Trump protesters at one college campus claimed their first scalp after one professor shares a dissenting view. A dissenter. Take a guess what that professor's view was. We'll show you what happened. And up next, see what happened when reporters asked Mr. Obama if he still thinks President-elect Trump is unfit for office.
Now that you've spent time with him, sitting down and talking to him for an hour and a half in the Oval Office, do you now think that President-elect Trump is qualified to be president?
On the economy, Donald Trump is uniquely unqualified to be our chief executive. That's why most CEOs and economists don't support him. On foreign policy, Donald Trump is temperamentally unfit to be commander-in-chief. Don't take my word for it. Listen to the Republicans who've refused to support him. Over the weekend, his campaign took away his Twitter account because he's erratic. If his closest advisors don't trust him to tweet, why would any of us trust him with the nuclear codes?
That was President Obama 1 week ago, the night before the election. Here's what happened when reporters asked about those remarks at a press conference this afternoon.
You said more than once that you did not believe that Donald Trump would ever be elected president and that you thought he was unfit for the office. Now that you've spent time with him, sitting down and talking to him for an hour and a half in the Oval Office, do you now think that President-elect Trump is qualified to be president?
I think that he successfully mobilized a big chunk of the country to vote for him, and he's going to win. He has won. He's going to be the next president. Regardless of what experience or assumptions he brought to the office, this office has a way of waking you up. Some of his gifts that obviously allowed him to execute one of the biggest political upsets in history, those are ones that hopefully he will put to good use on behalf of all the American people.
Politics is weird. Mo Alithi is the founding executive director of the Georgetown University Institute of Politics and Public Service, and Carl Higbie is the spokesperson for the Great America PAC. Great to see you both.
Not anymore, Megan.
Oh, not anymore?
No.
Are you moving into the administration?
No, no, not yet. But the PAC dissolved that day after, so I can say whatever I want.
Yeah, what am I saying? Yeah, I predict a future in the administration for Carl Higbie. You heard it here first.
Well, we'll see.
I know nothing. I just am predicting. Okay, let me ask you, Mo, I actually thought President Obama's willingness to sound a more conciliatory, hopeful tone about Donald Trump, who he clearly does not like, spoke well of him. What'd you think?
Yeah, I agree. Look, I don't think there's any question that President Obama was not a fan of Donald Trump heading into the election.
Nor vice versa.
Or vice versa. I think I'm putting it very mildly to say that. But I think everything he has said since then has been exactly what he should say. Mm-hmm. It is his job. It is his responsibility to oversee a strong transition to the new president-elect. And he and his staff have been doing everything they can to make sure that transition goes well. He can be asked as many times as people want to ask him if what he thinks of the president-elect. That's irrelevant at this point. It's his responsibility to make sure the transition goes well. Yep. I think that is what he's doing, and I think he did a good job of pointing to try to ease some of the concerns that Americans have. By pointing out some of the strengths that Donald Trump may bring to the office.
And also suggesting that the office can lift you up and can change you in a way that's beneficial for the country. But, Carl, there were other comments, too, where it was leaked today that when Donald Trump walked through the White House and with his staff, that the staff was clueless about the fact that the existing West Wing staff all have to leave. There won't be any holdovers. They're going to have to fill all those posts. And there was sort of a, don't worry, Barack Obama's going to help him out. He's going to help. Yep. And political watchers said that's clearly a shot by the existing White House team.
Yeah. Well, I think Barack Obama said it for two reasons. One, he didn't think Donald Trump was going to win. So back then he was very confident that Hillary was going to be his successor. But two, also, I think Barack Obama, like you said, is trying to help him out. And he's effectively trying to keep Donald Trump from overturning most of his legislation, which, quite frankly, has been a disaster. So Obama's going to try to do anything he can to salvage his legacy.
What do you think, Mo? Because President Obama said, look, Donald Trump is not ideological. He's pragmatic, which is probably true, right? I mean, he doesn't seem ideological. He was a Democrat for most of his life, right?
That's right, yeah.
But then he went on to say, but he has to watch his temperament and be careful about messaging, and pointed out how it's one thing to say something as a candidate, but when you are the president of the United States, you can change markets, you can change safety and world security.
Get Mo. Oh, wait, no.
Well, do you think Donald Trump's going to get that, Mo?
Look, I think every single person who has ever stepped into the Oval Office has found that that office has changed them. I think anyone who has walked into that office has realized that that the office not only changes them, but changes some of the things that they hope to accomplish. President Obama said very famously that when he was running for president, he wanted to change the political culture of Washington. And he tells you now that he wasn't able to do that there were too many realities here that stopped that from happening. So I think what he's saying is true, that President-elect Trump is not an ideologue. I think he's scrambled a lot of the typical ideological divides in this country, and that he is pragmatic. And I think the president is both predicting and maybe hoping a bit that once he gets into office, he'll realize that some of the things he talked about just can't happen.
Carl, I'll give you the last word.
Yeah, well, I think a lot of the things you talked about can happen, and I think it just takes somebody who's, annoyed at the system enough. I mean, look at the fact of the matter is Donald Trump has been so, anxious and so, happy to get in this office and try to crush the system that's been breaking America's backs. I think he can do it, and I think he's the right man for the job.
All right, guys, great to see you. And you are not alone in that belief. Well, we've seen anti-Trump protests breaking out